Welcome to Real Estate Coaching Radio, starring award-winning real estate coaches and #1 international best-selling authors, Tim and Julie Harris. This is the #1 daily radio show for realtors looking for a no BS, authentic, real-time coaching experience. What's really working in today's market, how to generate more leads, make more money, and have more time for what you love in your life. And now your hosts, Tim and Julie Harris.
Welcome back. We are back with you with another fantastic interview as part of our World's Greatest Agent Interview Series. Today is longtime friend, coaching client, EXP partner, John Walkinshaw. So John, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here.
Now, John's got, Julie is his personal coach, and she's written down some notes for me. So I'm going to part of your introduction. No, it's all good. John is number 12 in Canada, individual agent with EXP. You're #1 in Ontario. Am I getting that right?
Correct.
And last year you did 33.5 million in volume.
Correct.
And what is really interesting, what I'm really going to want to focus on, I just interviewed Carrie Shull right before you, and she's got this team of 70 agents. They did, like, in 2021, they did 730 million, right? But it's one of these very complicated, situations where there's a lot of moving parts and teams and all the rest of it. Like most teams and brokerages, she's gone through the ebbs and the flows of all the things that have been happening in the last 3 years in the real estate business. But you're you're on the other end of that, because you're an individual agent who's running massive profit margins, and you have your daughter works with you. And so I want to share with them the kind of the mindset of somebody who knows how to build a big team, chose not to build a big team, and get into the nuances of that, because we need to kind of lay the groundwork for the fact that you can be massively successful in real estate, assuming, you follow a path where the outcome is going to be what you're desirous of, which is in most cases should be high net profit. So as I ramble on a little bit less, what are you thinking?
You're right on the money. My background prior to getting in real estate about 9 years ago, almost 10, was I ran car dealerships. So kind of started out, as a sales guy, and 27 years later, for many years had been running as a general manager, 50 to 60 staff, and all the fun challenges. And, again, there's some really positive stuff in having big staffs, but it definitely distracts you in many ways, and you're dealing with all the different life situations for all those people. So when I got into real estate, although my prior brokerage was really encouraging me to build a big team, I decided to stay as an individual agent and, deal with my clients directly, service them the best I can possibly, service them. I always joke with new clients saying, the good news is, when you hire me, you get me. And the bad news is when you hire me, you get me. There's not a bunch of other people that, again, not to downplay any teams, but, if they hire the team leader because of their qualifications, and all the work's being done by people that are not the team leader and arguably not the same qualifications, to me, that was just a bit of an integrity breach.
Well, you said a whole bunch there. I was taking notes.
I know.
I was hoping you were still talking so I could still take some more notes. But the last thing you said was really fascinating. You said, the whole working on your business versus in your business thing, that's kind of like people always talk about that. Like, you're supposed to spend so much % of your time working in your business, on your business. And as you're forming your team and you're building your brokerage up, or you're building your team up, you spend less time working with the clients. What folks don't understand, and you understand because you have professional background prior to being in real estate, was there's either working in your business, on your business, but the working part is still relevant. So you can be John Walkinshaw and you're working primarily with sellers and you're doing the work yourself, or you can be John Walkinshaw who's got a team of people that's working with sellers. Now you're working with those agents, but you're still working. And matter of fact, I'll go as far as to say the nature of the work when you're working with team members, when you're working with staff, is more onerous than working directly with sellers. What do you think? Or working with clients directly? Yeah, working with.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I love meeting new people, and I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm an extrovert by design, but I do get energized dealing with people and meeting new people and wanting to genuinely help people with their problem. of selling and buying and all the stress, and I really like, kind of joining with them, relationshiping with them throughout that entire process. Being their guided, their professional guide through that process. I talk often about, okay, I understand that concern you have. I have the ball. You go to sleep at night, and let me carry the ball. And I feel like people genuinely appreciate, that. If I was a team, I wouldn't have that same direct link to those relationships, and I would feel less satisfied or less complete in the process.
It all comes down to what we led with, right? So you did $33.5 million last year, made low seven figures. And of that, I'm going to venture a guess, the amount of money you spent on your business was what, less than 10% of that?
Other than my charitable giving, yeah, probably.
Yeah. So that means that he's making he's making a little over $1 million, and he's keeping $1 million before all the taxes and whatnot. So it's where what's interesting is, again, just was on the phone with Carrie, or on the Zoom with Carrie, and Julie and I had these conversations with brokers and teams every day. I'll do this math in case you guys are exposed to this for the first time, listeners and viewers. So if you have a buyer agent commission, and John, help me out with this because I know you've done this math too. You have a $10,000 buyer agent commission. Average sale price in the United States is $400,000, 2.5%. Let's just call it 10 grand. And then most cases, most of the big teams now are buying their buyer leads, and they're paying 40%. I know it's hard to, I feel sorry for them, honestly. Yep. So you buy that buyer lead for 40%, then you're paying a broker, then you're paying 50% of that money to your buyer's agent. I do the math here, listeners and viewers, there is no profit left. And so what's happened over the last, really, I think 7 years is where I really started to see it. A lot of these big teams are literally losing money, literally essentially writing checks on the buyer side of the business just to have a buyer side, just to do the transactions. And some of them have been smart and have monetized that through mortgage and title and the rest of it. But where they come in contact with Julie and I, and as far as coaching, is when they say, you know what, I'm realizing that my fantasy about starting a team was so that I could step out of the business. And I not only am I not able to step out of the business because all the care and feeding of the agents, but now I have to actually stay in production because I have to list and sell, because most of the team leaders are focused on the seller side. And I have to move what would be my profit from those listings to support the buyer side of the business. And that's not, and then where it all kind of rubber meets the road is a tough market, because now the commission compression, and now fewer transactions and fixed costs, and the lead generation costs are going up. And now it's really becoming a plague. And now they're looking back over their shoulders and they're saying, I don't know how to actually proactively lead generate. I don't know actually how to build a business that's not going to be essentially a money loser. And this is a good time for everybody to hit hard reset on your business expectations. Forgive yourself. Well, it's not even necessary. You were following a successful business model, but the business model has just changed so rapidly in the last 36 months. It's time for you to adjust to what the new demands of the industry are. And in a lot of cases, it's going to result in you making way more profit. I'm just coming right off that interview with Carrie, and my mind's reeling with the math, but what are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm 100% on board with that. When you have a bunch of extra agents' mouths to feed, you don't necessarily have the engine to draw the leads that you need. And that, increases your expense and your stress level and all the rest of it. So yeah, no, for me, it was, keep it simple, stupid. I knew I was talking to myself, and we've just kind of driven off into the, real estate world with the mindset that we will not have a team. You'd mentioned at the very beginning that I do have my daughter working with me. I've got two daughters actually working with me. One is a licensed agent. And she is an individual agent that, I say we share expenses, which means as her dad, I pay for everything. And that's cool. I'm totally comfortable with that, but she's still an individual agent. She's got her own, image, her own picture on her signs, her own, kind of advertising. We do some joint advertising together, but, somebody would call her or someone would call me, and we would go off on our own paths with those people. And that seems to work. And my other daughter's my kind of general manager, which does a lot of the background stuff, not licensed. So for me, it's great. I got a little family business going. My son does my drone videos and stuff like that. You know, how could a dad be any more happy being able to have those, you know, interactions and be able to help out. We have been successful financially the last several years since we started into real estate, I guess 9 years ago, and you know, it's just been a blessing for the whole family. Kind
Yeah.
of creating a bit of a legacy, which is something I didn't think I would have, you know, in my prior life as a car guy.
Well, your approach to the business was unique. Well, it doesn't really, you know, unique in this and how most people are thinking about branding and buying leads and the rest of it. You actually, and Julie wrote down some of your lead generation things that you do, but you're not, you pick up the phone. You have no problem whatsoever being a proactive lead generator. And you
Yeah.
do know that ultimately the product of your business is profit, right? No profit, no business. And that's something
Yeah.
that people are finding out the hard way is true. So let's talk about lead generation. Julie said you did a lot of very, very clever, high touch, center of influence past client events. Can you talk about those?
Yeah. So I'm uncomfortable talking about that because I don't want anyone to think that that they're lead generation tools. But I'm very active in my church. I'm very active in several community boards. I'm kind of a lead fundraiser because of my, you know, my relationships with lots of people. So I do a lot of fundraising for different charitable organizations, and you know, am active socially in many ways. And those exposures where I'm on stage all the time, you know, several times a year, I'm kind of the MC for different events, and I'm calling up, you know, high value people, you know, fundraising for those as a third party. It's really easy to like to ask somebody for money when it's not money for you. And again, I form relationships with those people, and in turn, long term, you know, those end up in, you know, leading to referrals and direct business and very friendly, you know, contact business relationships with people because of the nature of how we kind of started our communications. So it's not like I'm, you know, knocking on doors and, you know, doing cold calls and all that type of thing nearly as much as just being, you know, I'm not a secret agent, you know, which you guys talk about on your podcast. Anywhere I go, you know, my kids, you know, tease me that if I'm literally doing something, you know, working in the yard or doing something, and I need to go in and get a different shovel, I get my you know, suit jacket on, and you know, off I go into town. So anybody that I meet knows that I'm a realtor. So, you know, even if I'm at Home Depot, you know, I'm dressed for success. And those lead to real estate conversations because people will sometimes look at you, you know, differently because everybody else is in, you know, overalls and you're in your suit. And again, it's just kind of awareness. So
So
again,
you
some of
said
those are softer, but
yeah, you said something. I want to go back because you're right. I shouldn't have said lead generation activities. You're right. You would do those things whether you were in real estate or not, because that's the type
absolutely.
of person you are. So I should have framed that differently. So I apologize for that. But it's also important to point out too, the nuanced thing that John was just trying to help you guys understand. John Walkinshaw is being John Walkinshaw, doing what he would do, whether he was, you know, essentially a real estate agent or not, because he wants to do it. It's in alignment with the person that he is. And so sometimes, I mean, agents, truthfully, it's just make it too hard. What are the things that you like to do? What are the things you have, you know, passion for? What are the things you have interest in? Be an agent doing those things. And then you're going to be surrounded by, if, for example, you know, let's say you like to go to the gym. Well, when you're at the gym, don't wear your headphones and your hoodie and look like the Unabomber and basically expect somehow people to, you know, don't expect to get leads out of it. You're going to have to go there ready and willing. John said it perfectly. Don't be a secret agent, ready and willing to have conversations. John, that's a really important thing. Let's drill down on that if you don't mind. So, you know, agents are not even terrified. They're beyond terrified to have conversations with strangers, let's say, about real estate. Can you walk them through that? Like, how did you get your daughters to work past that, or just seeing dad do it for so long, probably they didn't have that issue?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think we just need to. A lot of times, people will look at you, and that's kind of your open door. You know, because you're dressed one step higher than the average person that's in that, you know, room. And I don't know, you just need to say, oh, I just came from a showing, or oh, I'm, you know, sorry, I can't stay for the whole meeting. I got to skip out because I've got a whatever. And again, it's little subtle things. And then people are like, oh yeah, I live in wherever, what do you think the market's going to do? And all those types of things. It's just kind of an open door. So you can have a conversation without, carding people and making it seem so obvious. And again, if you say something like, oh, I'm going to head out to a showing after this, that's why I'm kind of overdressed for this event, and somebody doesn't bite on that, that's okay. That's somebody you don't need to get into a conversation about real estate with anyway, because they're not interested. But there's 100 ways that you can enter into conversations with people. I leave business cards with little thank yous when I go to restaurants. It's a small thing, but they take the card and they look at it and then they put it in their wallet and show their family or show their spouse or whatever when they get home that they had this nice little letter left with the tip. And it's my business card, and then 2 days later, somebody says, oh, I'm interested in selling my house. Like, oh, I talked to a guy just the other day, and out comes the card because they still kept it. So there's a bunch of little soft, subtle things that you can do that don't seem like you're trying to, be a salesman, but be a salesman. I am not ashamed of being a salesman. People hire me to sell their home or to help them, negotiate the purchase of a home, and being a salesman is not something I'm ashamed of. So, that's all part of it, but you don't want to come off as that, that salesman. In my opinion, I think you have to be a
salesman. What is a salesman, John? In your view, what is a salesman?
Well, a salesman is somebody who's not afraid to ask for the business. A salesman's not afraid to negotiate and what I say, risk the relationship to make sure that I'm looking out for someone's best interests. Sometimes they want to list their house for more than it's going to be worth, and they're in for a world full of pain. And if I'm not willing as their salesperson to have that heart-to-heart conversation saying, yeah, the vinyl rollout flooring that you put in your kitchen is really beautiful, but it doesn't have a material that's typically in $1 million home. We need to be appropriate with the pricing that we're going to do. And I feel the market would react positively to your home if we priced it in around X. And those are awkward conversations because, that person may have rolled out that vinyl themselves and glued it down, and they feel very proud of the work that they did. And you have to nicely, but looking out for their best interest, you have to have that conversation with them. And I feel like it's little things like that I think a lot of agents shy away from. And that's where you build confidence with people. That's where you build trust. Not trying to underprice the property, but trying to be appropriate. And that could be telling them that they need to declutter. So many aspects of the sale are really important that they understand the cleaning of it. Quite often I'll recommend that I always like my cleaner to go in beforehand, and I'm happy to pay the couple $100 to have my cleaner run through. And that's just a way of nicely setting up the fact that your home is disgusting and we need to make sure that nobody comes through it looking like this. So, we all have it. We all have bathroom fans with fur on them, and we don't really realize it until we go to sell the house and a third person comes in and goes, oh my gosh, there's fur on your fan. We need to get rid of that. So again, figuring out a nice way to say that, but say it, or you're not doing your clients any justice, in my opinion. So all of that is kind of enwrapped in being a salesperson, risking having those hard conversations when necessary, having their best interests at heart 100% and proving it daily, and really working for them 100%. Fiduciary responsibility. That's what we're here for, right?
Well, a salesperson is just is a problem solver at the end of the day. And you clearly, there's nobody watching or listening to us right now that just doesn't instantly have a lot of love and respect for you, because you radiate this. It's not just confidence, it's sincerity. You have a quality about you that I'm sure, you probably don't even recognize it, but there is a John Walkinshaw thing that every time I've interacted with you, I sense that you truly do sincerely care about people in general. Not everyone's like that, and some people they have to grow to the realization that their highest and truest purpose on this planet is to be of service to other people. So if you start out with that thought, even if you don't feel it or believe it, but if you operate as if that were true, you're going to find more people are wanting to do business with you. And then the next progression of that is going to be, how do I get better at my craft? So it's fascinating, because at the end of the day, you can't be successful at anything in life. Doctor, dentist, landscaper. Well, I suppose landscaper, but not the owner of the landscape company. Well, maybe not even landscaper. You can't be successful at anything unless you're willing to sell. There's no such thing. I mean, it's the oldest fact that the highest paid people on planet Earth have always been salespeople, but they haven't been people selling Ginsu knives, right? They've been people who have risen to the tops of their industries because of the fact that they know how to sell themselves. And like, I had a listening presentation a billion years ago, and the guy was a very famous cardiologist. And I was nervous as nervous could be because, I was newish in real estate, and this was a very expensive house. The whole thing was just, as a fish out of water. And he sensed it, and he said to me, he had an Indian accent. He says, you and I are in the same business. And I said, how? I'm not a cardiologist. I don't, he goes, we both have to be salespeople. Then he went off to explain to me that he has to sell people into doing heart procedures. So he's a cardiologist, not the heart surgeon. So he's going to tell them what they need to have done, and then he's going to refer them to a surgeon. But he has to actually convince them to go to see the surgeon. And he doesn't get paid. There's not like a referral fee that's passing back from the surgeon. He's doing it for what's best for them. So I would say that one of the biggest breakthroughs that someone can have as a real estate agent or as any kind of professional is when the acceptance of the fact that your highest and truest purpose on this planet is to be of service to other people, and you all happen to have chosen the real estate industry, and so you have to be, willing to serve as a salesperson, solving other people's problems, buyers and sellers. I mean, that's really what it is. And there's such a massive sense of freedom on the other side of that acceptance that that's your role, isn't it? Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, absolutely. And the serving is the other thing that I was waiting to say. You have to be a salesman, but you also have to serve. Like, my tagline on all my videos is, it would be an honor to serve you. And I say that at the end of every video I do on every house that I have listed. And that, I genuinely feel that, like, again, serving someone sometimes means you have to have those tough conversations to make sure you're serving them appropriately, but you're still helping people. You're still serving them. So yeah, I genuinely believe that to the deepest core.
How do you soften the blow? Let's say you have to tell someone that their house is basically a dumpster fire, because there's no way you're going to be so direct to basically worry about offending them or hurting their feelings. And they're not objective. They don't see that the fact that it's a dumpster fire. Can you walk the listeners and viewers through how you go about delivering bad news?
Yep. With me, I tell stories. So sometimes my listing appointments would go a little bit longer than I should, if being a busy guy. I should kind of be in and out. I have my pre-listing package that I've gotten, and done, basically modified through your guys' process. So I drop off my pre-listing package in advance. I go into the listing appointment. It's the house literally needs to be blown up, but we can put some lipstick on it and probably save it. And I will have conversations about the other house. Oh, there was this other deal that I did, and we did this, and we had this outcome. And I just feel like if we did a similar type process, that we would have a similar outcome. And so I kind of third party a lot of the conversations. I don't say your house is disgusting. I say, oh, you should see what I see. I was in a house, and we did this. Again, really short example is, I did have a house that was going to get torn down. We wanted to sell it to a builder who was going to tear it down, but the builder, because of the condition of the house, was only willing to give us so much money. So we ended up not being able to negotiate with the builder, decided we were going to put it on actual market, did some beautification to the house, did some staging to the house, put it on market. The builder came, looked at it a second time, and paid us fully what we were asking in the first place, because now the house, in that guy's estimation, met the value that we were asking, and then he bulldozed it. It makes sense.
No sense. Yeah.
Right. So the builder thought he was being ripped off for what he was buying initially, but once we, did a few little things, like we spent $6,000 or $5,000 or something and got an extra $100,000 for the house, which makes no sense, but it makes sense. So, those are the types of stories that I would tell in order to facilitate getting people to, agree. But at the end of the day, I work for them. If they want it to be sold in the state that it's in, we can do that. I just personally don't feel that's in your best interest if your goal is getting the maximum money. If your actual goal isn't the highest price, but you want the absolute least aggravation, we can do that. So I have to understand what their goal is.
Right.
So
well,
that's part of the qualifying.
You just say so much in such a short period of time, but it is a fascinating little thing you ended with, is the fact that everyone assumes the highest price and the biggest check that the seller receives at closing is their number one priority. But I would say probably 75% of the time, it's the least amount of hassle. They're not most focused on the money aspect of it. And an inexperienced agent's going to assume that's the most important thing without qualifying what's most important to them. So you'll lose listings, listeners, if you go in there and you give these sellers a long list of crap to do. But what you didn't realize is they need to be in Omaha, if they need to relocate in 90 days, and they have absolutely no interest doing all that work, and they're willing to sell it for significantly less just to basically expedite the sale. But you went in there assuming, it's all skills based at the end of the day. So you said something else too. So we're still focusing on condition issues, which is kind of fun, but you have a seller, you walk in, the house is a dumpster fire. Will you be the one that delivers the bad news and the list of things to do after you've qualified them at the highest price and the most nets, the most important thing? Or will you sometimes have somebody else come in, your house cleaner or whatever, that you've given them a list to, and have that person be the bearer of bad news? Which is your strategy?
So I've got a three-way strategy, and you're right on the money. So one is me, and I kind of, I still have to maintain the relationship where I can't cross certain lines.
Right.
But as you say, I can send in a second party person like my stager or my cleaner who can deliver message, and they're there for one day and gone and never to be heard of again. And I can still maintain that relationship, and I can still soften that message after the fact and still come in as the good guy. We still need to do it, but she shouldn't have really maybe said it that way if it's touched a nerve. So yeah, my stager definitely partners with me in making sure that she has those types of conversations. And again, when I'm talking to them, quite often I'm going to just give them a heads up. So when my stager comes through, just a heads up, she's going to talk about your fans in your bathrooms, being furry. Don't be upset by that. That's every house we go into, blah, 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 blah. And then when she delivers the message, they've heard it for the second time, they're not going to react as negatively potentially. And I didn't say it, I said she will. So it's a softer way of kind of delivering the same message. And again, there's a multitude of things that can be the behavior of the sellers, when you're dealing with divorce type situations, or, I always kind of say, I'm going to try and keep my ego out of it. There's situations where sometimes, I'll get all riled up inside and I want to react to a salesperson that gave us bad feedback or something. So I'm going to really try hard. And if you guys can help me with that, I'd really appreciate it. And sometimes when people do start getting wound up, I'll stop them and I'll go, whoa, 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 don't get me going. And that kind of slows them down too. So again, it can be the house, like you say, it looks like it should be blown up, or it can be their behavior. It can be, allowing showings. There's a multitude of challenges that come up, and we need to be nice and firm to make sure that we're looking out for their best interests. And I talk a lot about ripping the Band-Aid off. Run with me. I got the ball, but run with me. Let's rip the Band-Aid off. Let's get this done. Yes, I know it's not a convenient time to have that showing, but these people are qualified. I've talked to their agent. They seem like they would be the perfect family to have it, and then you don't have to worry about it again. So let's get through this. How can I help? What if I swing over and turn on the lights? Whatever we can do.
There's scripting things that you just do without thinking. For example, I've heard you when you're talking. For example, listeners or viewers, if you're having to deliver something that might be perceived as bad news, or you're a little bit nervous about how they're going to receive it, ask permission first. This is kind of a coaching technique too. So you'd say like, Bob, so listen, I've got something I've got to tell you, and this might seem, I don't know, maybe even a little offensive, something you might not want to hear. You can edit that however you want to. Do I have permission to be direct with you, even if this is something that you probably won't want to hear? You got to have phrasing like that prior to delivering bad news. If there's no buffer, what's going to ultimately happen is the seller is going to build even buyer, or by the way, your spouse or anybody else, right? Your child, they're going to build resentments towards you, and they're not going to listen to you. And if it's a seller, they're going to start working against you. They're going to stop, being, showings can't happen. No, we're not lowering the price. No, I'm leaving my, camel heads up on the wall, whatever it is, right? They're going to stop being cooperative because of the fact that you offended them without meaning to. So you're going to have to learn how to have a scripted approach. And you wonder sometimes listeners and viewers, you see great listings expire in your marketplace, and you're wondering, why the hell did that thing expire? It looked like it was great condition, price, location. It's for the reasons that I just stated. It's because what happened was the buyer or the seller got mad at the listing agent, fired the listing agent, listing got withdrawn, or the seller stopped being cooperative with the listing agent, didn't allow showings or whatever, listing expires. Those little tiny little personality conflicts, and whenever you run into a personality conflict with anybody, you got to take responsibility for it. And so the backtrack on that is if you've offended someone, say, so listen, Bob, it occurs to me that in your own words and your own phrasing, but get to the heart of it, I may have offended you without knowing it. Based on the feeling I'm having right now, I sense that maybe someplace along the way we got off track, and I want to apologize for that and see if we can maybe hit hard reset and restart. So you got to own whenever there's tension, because that's your job as a salesperson. Ultimately, that's what you are. So John, you are expressing this too. We get so, in real estate, especially when you're dealing with stressful sellers, it's oftentimes the worst of them comes out, right? The nicest, sweetest person you ever met turns out to be a total sociopath with a tiny bit of stress, right? So you've got to show emotion without being emotional. And I know you do that really well. So what does that mean to you? How do you show emotion without being emotional? How do you show that you're emotional and compassionate without internalizing it and burning your candle at both ends?
To me, I just know that I'm helping people, and I think that kind of gets me through. And again, I've had a background, as a automotive dealer. People come in and they have to pay $2,000 for a service bill that they weren't expecting on their car, and they can turn into nasty people. And it's not against us, it's not against me, but they're I'm the buck. I'm where the buck stops, and I have to tell them that they have to pay for it and all that type of thing. So I just try and understand what as may be happening in their life otherwise that's causing them to be the way they are. And if anything, I have compassion for them as opposed to getting my ego involved. Because if my ego flares and their ego flares, no one wins. We burn the place down, and all the work that's been done to date is no good. So I mean, we still have to we have to look out for ourselves. And if there's something that's just absolutely toxic, then you sometimes would need to say, you know what, you need to deal with someone else. I'm happy to refer you out. I'm obviously not doing the right job for you. I've never actually in real estate had to have that conversation, but I've in my life I have, and quite often that slows them down, and they're like, whoa, no, and then they start backtracking. But I don't know. I feel like it's so important to make them understand deeply that you care for them and that you are doing everything in your power to help them, and regardless of the outcome, they know you went to war for them. And with that, I just don't have challenges. Just this week, I had a situation where I had a flooring guy go in that was supposed to give me a quote on something into somebody's home while they were at work. And the technician that I sent in that I've done a ton of business with said, oh, this is so minor, I'm just going to do it. And he went ahead and did a repair on someone's house. And the people were really upset. They were happy with the work, but they were really upset that I went ahead and did this work to their home without their authorization. And we're talking about a $150 bill, which I'm happy to pay. I wasn't going to charge them for it anyway. But anyway, so the wife made a comment to me that the husband was going to call me because he's all upset, and he didn't call. I phoned him 4 times because I want to get the air out of that balloon and not have it fester. So head on, I made sure that I ultimately got him after 4 different times that I tried to call. I ended up phoning the wife and saying, walk the phone to him because I want to get past this. I want to know that, I did nothing, that it just happened, and I apologize and I own it. And anyway, so we had this 2-minute conversation. Everything's good. The air's out of the balloon, and we're off, rolling into the listing that will go live today without that, black cloud that could follow us and rear its ugly head later when we don't want it. So we just have to be mature adults and deal with stuff head on.
You said something there again that I hope listeners are paying attention to. So your ego and their ego is what causes the problem ultimately, right?
100%.
They're feeling attacked and you're feeling attacked. But listeners, practice this. Your and what you're feeling when you're listening to John or watching him is a person who is confident, who is not allowing their ego to run the ship. Otherwise, you'd perceive that and you'd kind of feel it in right your core. And so John knows that that works against him because he has the mindset of service. So here's the little lesson, hopefully for some of you at least, is if you truly are locked into the idea that I'm here to be of service to you, like I know John and I are trying to be of service to all of you listeners and viewers, right? So if we're locked into that, our egos don't become part of the conversation. If you're dealing in a high pressure situation with your sellers or your buyers or your spouse or your dog or whatever, and your ego kicks in, all of a sudden that's just going to elevate and it's going to get worse. But if you are coming from a place where I'm just here to be of service to you, I apologize if I offended you. I apologize if I said or have done anything to offend you. It wasn't my intent. And then you're stepping your ego aside. What that does is maybe not right away, but shortly thereafter, their ego is going to no longer feel like it's being attacked. And so since it doesn't have an adversary to lock horns with, it dissipates too. And then almost, I don't know, I'll even use the word that popped into my head, almost on a spiritual level, the nature of the conversation, the relationship elevates. And those people, oddly enough, John, I'm sure you'll have examples of this. The people that you've had the biggest locking or that have tried to go after you, that have been some of the most aggressive people, have been the people that have been that are usually in the dire straits of having to sell a house. And they become the best source of past clients. And, they become one of the best referral sources because they know you put up with their BS at one of their worst times, right?
And they admit it. If you can deal with me, I'm thrilled to refer you to my friends because they're actually nice. Heard that so many times.
Well, Jules and I haven't sold real estate in forever, and we still get referrals from our centers of influence and past clients, and all the ones that are still sending us referrals, and we send them to our agents in Central Ohio. But our coaching client EXP people, but they're always the ones that were like the grouchy ass FISBO or the whatever, because for that exact reason. So these are, it is fascinating.
I think it's a game. Like I get great pride internally dealing with some people that I know most agents couldn't deal with this. This is insane. And you're hurting the squirrels and you're working the emotions and all that stuff. And it's really, it takes a lot out of you. But at the end of the day, I can lay my head on the pillow and say, you know what? I don't think a lot of people would have been able to accomplish what I accomplished today. And I feel good about that. Although I'm exhausted and although I don't deserve it or whatever other mindset I could have, I helped those people get through something that was really challenging. And I don't think a lot of other people could have. And that makes me feel good. And that's my reward, that, rather than getting all, wound up into it and saying, well, I shouldn't have to put up with that and whatever. And I'm like, I get paid a lot of money to put up with that. So, if I can help them and I get paid a lot of money at the end of the day, let's go. Giddy up.
It's only 10% that are grumpy, but it's the same 10%. If you ran a restaurant, you have 10, when we're in the car business, 10%. If you were a dentist, 10% of your clients are just going to be harebrained. That just is the way it is. And so if you serve 10 sellers or 10 buyers and all of a sudden you have one that's a Yahoo, well, that's your 10%. You've got 9 more to look forward to that are all going to be great, and it almost always works out like that too. It's kind of funny. What's interesting,
and it's a challenge to win them over. That's part of the fun. We do a lot of business. We've done the past 2 years, we've done like 135 properties or something. So, the whole lather, rinse, repeat type thing. Everything is different. Everything is unique, but a lot of the same stuff. So when you run into one of those challenges, it's kind of fun to say, okay, let's own this. Let's make this, just dazzle that person. I'm not going to take their bait. I'm just going to dazzle them. And they almost are confused because you're not getting wound up and taking their bait. And that becomes a game to me. That's fun.
Well, it's because they're.
Yeah, I don't go looking for those people, but.
Oh, I know. Well,
when you're in it, you just, you make it happen.
So I'm going to tell a funny story. You'll appreciate this. I doubt if Julie's ever told you this before. So where we used to sell real estate, there was a very famous mental health hospital called Harding Hospital. Okay. So Harding Hospital, if you Google it, was famous for some of the multiple personality disorder types. One of the most famous, it was on Netflix. The guy was housed at Harding Hospital. So let's just assume that Harding Hospital were some of the most, mentally challenged people on planet Earth. Well, turns out that each of the rooms had individual addresses, and we didn't know that. So Julie and I would do this was right as part of our real estate area, and we'd sell a listing, we'd send out a just sold card, and on the sold card there would be an offer for a CMA. So every time we sent out these just sold cards to this particular market, we didn't know that the company we were using was selling or sending these sold cards to Harding Hospital. So we would get the craziest people, and I mean that quite literally. Maybe crazy isn't the right word, but we are getting some of the most interesting leads from those postcards. And it got to the point where we would just not believe, we'd start writing down the conversations we were having. But anyway, so yes, that is a good sharpening of the sword.
Exactly.
Let's talk about pre-qualification, because a lot of agents do not know how to pre-qualify because they're afraid of asking tough questions and running off potential leads. Let's talk about pre-qualification from a buyer perspective. So if you're going to work with a buyer, tell us about what minimum standards they have to actually meet.
So first off, with me, I like to hook them up with a mortgage broker to see what they can actually afford and go through the actual process. So the mortgage broker that I refer to most often gives basically a firm approval. They still need to see the actual contract before it's 100% firm, but they don't need to check in, the income a second time or credit or whatever. It's a binding approval, assuming the house matches the requirements that the bank would have for the house.
Okay, let me level off there because that's such an important point. And in American terms, I'm sure it's very similar. Actually, in Canada, your mortgage regs are way tougher than the US. Every loan and every mortgage in Canada is a recourse loan. And your standards are actually tougher than the US. But listeners, what he just said. So when you're working with a loan officer, make sure the loan officer's checked with all 3 credit reports, done the verification of assets, done the verification of employment, confirmed that they have all the things necessary. And when you get that letter, pre-approval and pre-qualified, guys, bad news for you, doesn't mean anything. So you get the letter, and the letter has to state that the only thing that the financing is contingent on is the property that they go in contract appraising for the amount necessary for them to get the loan. That's it. If you get a lender's letter with a lot of other garbage, it always starts out like this, dear Bob, Steve and Mary Smith have pre-qualified for blah, 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 blah. And the first paragraph is boilerplate. The second paragraph is all the subject twos. If you have any subject twos other than the appraisal, that is a garbage letter. Those buyers have not done bunk, and it's probably not their fault. It's their lazy loan officer who hasn't done the actual job.
Exactly. Yeah. So quite often, if somebody comes to me with their own, letter of approval from one of the other lazy brokers, I'll say it's always good to get a second opinion, and I'll start the process with my broker as well. But again, I do ask to see that, and again, sometimes people are hesitant to show it initially because they don't, understand. But I become a trusted guide in the process, which means I have to do that with my eyes open. I have to know what they're doing. So there's many of those types of things where, the pre-qualifying letter, meeting with them, trying to find out what their desires and goals are at the end of the day. What's your down payment? Where's the down payment coming from? Because there can be some challenges on, where that money comes from. When would it be available? Kind of talk through the process where, if we do an offer and it's accepted within 24 hours, we need the deposit. Is that something that you can do? Okay, maybe we should move the funds now and be ready. Yeah, it might cost you a few pennies in interest, but, we need to be locked and loaded, so that we can, successfully negotiate something and be able to fulfill our obligations. So a lot of that. And if there's other people involved in the decision process, I want to make sure that I've met with them or that I've at least had a conversation with them. Nothing worse than dad's giving me a gift of X number of dollars. It's like, okay, so how much influence does that have on the decision? Well, not much. Okay, that means there's some. When can we get him involved? Should we do a showing with him, a second showing before we make the offer? Or, I'm going to have a conversation with dad direct and just make sure, here's what we're planning, are you on board? Yep, perfect, okay, great. Because if it comes out of left field and tries to take your knees out, when you're midway through negotiating, that you lose credibility with the other agent when you have to suddenly do a showing after you've already done an offer and there's another sign back, and now all of a sudden you want to see the house again. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute, are you guys actually engaged in this thing or what's going on? So as much of those advanced understanding of who you're dealing with and what their financial means are, and how committed they are to the process, so that we can decide, whether we are going to be able to help them before I sign. And everything I say with I is I say we, but before we sign a contract with somebody to be their buyer agent, I want to make sure they're not just kicking tires. I'm a busy person. I love helping people, but if they're looking just to, go to a bunch of, showings and not necessarily buy something, then I'm not probably the best person for them. And maybe they should be doing open houses and, keeping me up to date on how the progress is going. And then when they're actually serious about something, we re-engage.
It's
So
a
I know
pretty-
that's hard,
No,
but
otherwise you're not. And so in the United States, agents are going to have to require, or they're required, by the end of the year, I would think, to have exclusive buyer agency contracts signed. So
Right.
every agent in the United States, do you guys have required?
yes, we've had those for years.
Oh, really?
Ours got way more complicated in January of this year. So yeah,
let me ask about that. All right. So, unfortunately, I'd forgotten that. I do remember that now. So in the United States, traditionally, it's only been an agency form signed. And now they're going to have the agency form signed stating who they represent. And now they have to have an exclusive buyer agency contract signed where it's clearly stating what the responsibilities are of the buyer, or rather of the buyer's agent, and how the buyer is going to ultimately be responsible for the buyer's agent's commission. So you guys have been doing that way for years.
So yes. The buyer agent's commission is still traditionally standard, that is paid for by the seller, which I know you guys are, kind of reinventing that.
Yeah.
But our rules have, in my opinion, the pendulum has swung too far, where technically, if I'm at a cocktail party and I'm chatting with someone, and they say, "Oh, you're in real estate. How's the market going?" Legally, I'm supposed to tell them information that would be, available in, the newspaper or whatever. I can't give them any professional opinion or professional advice unless I have them sign a buyer contract. And that is ludicrous. How is that beneficial, and helpful?
I don't even know how you do that. Honestly, how would you even do that? How do you
I
know?
can't do it.
How do you know if what you're saying is
Right.
available?
I can say, well, the Royal Bank just came out with a study that said, that in the general Toronto area, the average price was this. And I can do that because then I'm just kind of citing statistics that are common knowledge. But if I say, based on my history and based on the number of houses that normally sell in a given week, and I see a trend coming of this, good or bad, then technically I would be, breaking my responsibilities, and I would have to say, oh, well, I'd love to tell you, I happen to have a contract with me. So, can you set your wine glass down for a second, sign this, and then I'll answer? Are you kidding me? That's crazy. And in Canada, we have now, as of January, unrepresented buyers, that as a listing agent, I can get a phone call from somebody who says, I don't have an agent, I don't want an agent, you are listing the home, I want to see it, in which case I now have the obligation to my seller to show this unrepresented buyer the property. And while I'm doing that showing, even if I know there's a defect in the home, or any assistance whatsoever, it is my legal obligation to my seller to only sell that home, and I cannot do anything to help that buyer whatsoever. So the buyer in that scenario potentially writes on a napkin the price that they want to pay and gives it to me, and that becomes the offer. And then I go to the seller, explain the scenario, and we would sign back an offer to sell the home to that buyer with actual legal paperwork and all that type of thing. So I mean, I just think that's ludicrous, but that's the land we're living in right now, and it's brand new. We're still trying to figure out some of the nuances of it, but yeah,
I'm curious about what you just said. So if you get a buyer who is officially unrepresented and they want to see a listing, you're obligated to obviously do your job of representing the house for the seller. Are you allowed to pre-qualify that buyer? I mean, wouldn't that put that would
anything that benefits my seller?
Well, right, but I mean, that's where your conflict's going to come in your country,
Right.
because I mean, that's the buyer's going to been, why the hell as a buyer, if they're not going to give you any information on themselves financially, that would put them in a disadvantage when it goes to actually writing an offer, because you know what they actually can buy. But at the same time, you have to represent your seller, and you're not going to want to risk taking someone who's going to just go to their medicine cabinets and steal all their drugs and isn't qualified to buy a bar of soap. I mean,
Right.
that's cray
Yep.
cray. Yeah.
Right. It's
That's a lot.
very challenging right now. Yeah. So, and again, I mean, at the end of the day, if we get into a negotiation type process, I am not on their side of the table at all as a buyer. So I am literally negotiating with an unprofessional who's more emotional, and there's no one else to kind of buffer that. And to what end? They don't, in Canada to this point, the buyer doesn't pay to have representation. The representation is paid for by the seller.
Are they asking for what would have been the buyer agent's commission? I mean,
in Canada, we can only give commission to a licensed agent. So we would not be able to pay them the commission. Arguably, there could be a commission savings, which in turn could be, negotiated into the price, arguably. But most agents, including myself, aren't necessarily, like, if I'm doing both ends of the deal for an unrepresented buyer, I want paid from the seller for the extra exposure and work that I'm doing. So it's not just in a traditional world, we're 2.5 on each side where we are. So we're charging more than 2.5 to represent the seller if we're dealing with an unrepresented buyer, because we're doing twice the work.
that totally makes sense. And it's also twice the liability. I mean, working with an unrepresented buyer.
It's probably 5 times the liability because we're dealing with an unprofessional.
Well, most certainly. And so I'm just curious that, so are your listing contracts now carving that out, or is that just something that you figured out how to do? So your whole, explain, I'm curious.
Yeah, so my listing agreement now has a Schedule A that lists if this, that, if that, this.
Wow.
And one of those scenarios is if it's an unrepresented buyer, then it ends up being, 3.5 or 4%, depending on the situation, rather than 5. So there's still a savings, but, to me, not a big enough benefit to the buyer to not be represented, in my opinion. But then again, I obviously have a bias. But
it
I don't
doesn't
know.
make sense.
I can't think of a circumstance where if somebody wanted to work for me for free as a professional in a different industry to help me accomplish something, that I wouldn't want to take the helping hand. I can't figure it out.
Well, I mean, in the United States, it's part of the whole commission sharing lawsuit thing that the buyer's agent fee was never technically free, because a buyer was essentially paying for it in the sale price of the house. And that's what you're saying as well.
Yeah.
It's funny. I think it was the New York Times, maybe it wasn't, but I think it was, came out with this big article and one of the elements of the article was, now that there's no more required buyer agent commission paid by the seller, that sellers were going to reduce their price commensurate to what they would have been paying to a buyer agent. No seller ever in
the history of the world
has ever thought about that, ever.
No.
What they think it, I'm going to
the
say
neighbor sold for whatever, I want more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, litigation and all the rest of it will work all these things through in the future. So, but pre-qualifying in your world must be an absolute nightmare at this point, which leans back into the reason that I know you and Julie, you guys focus primarily on working with sellers, because working on sellers, well, you explain to the listeners, why is being a listing agent, even though it's more skills-based, so much more, so much better, let's just use a word, than working primarily with buyers?
Well, buyers can decide to rent. Buyers can decide to live back on a home. There's so many things that can go wrong with a buyer when they lose their momentum or their excitement. Where sellers, as a rule, are more committed to have gone through that process, getting the house ready, and they're more committed to fulfilling the sale. So again, if a negative offer comes in and it's, we negotiate it back and forth and it goes nowhere and everybody leaves the table frustrated, the buyer agent might lose their client. I likely won't, because I've still got the house for sale and I've still got my sign on their lawn. And we'll just wait for the next buyer to come along.
Well, so for listeners, he just said it perfectly. And just to sort of summarize, There's no such thing as a buyer that has to buy, because buyers, as John just pointed out, can always change their minds. And they do a lot. Interest rates went up. The wind, the political winds are blowing this way. Their dog has a cold, whatever. Buyers change their minds all the time. My landlord's not raising my rent. I'm going to stay put. My mom's putting new carpet in the basement, so I'm going to stay in the basement another year, whatever, right? But there are examples, plenty of examples why a seller has to sell. So you have two choices, listeners. You can choose to work with people that absolutely have to transact, or people that could change their minds and often do buyers. So that's the reason our primary focus of anybody that we ever come in contact with in our coaching organization is to get them to lean into becoming listing agents as fast as possible, because that's where you're going to create ultimate leverage, and that's how you're ultimately going to have a business. And by the way, you can emulate what John's been able to do so successfully for so long and have, massive profit margins. I'm going to round the bend on this one, one closing thought. You can
Just
be
one last thing.
Sorry.
The sellers generally are buyers.
Oh, that's true.
The fact that you have a seller, you're probably getting two ends, not just one.
Well, and you and I are going to talk about this forever, because we're both very, passionate about the fact that listings is the way to go. List to last. So this has always been true. But yeah, what John just said, if you know how to proactively lead generate to sellers, and you know how to follow our 7-step listing process, pre-qualify them, send the pre-listing pack, the whole 9 yards, and you build up a listings-based business, it very rarely is one listing, just one transaction, because that seller is going to buy something. You might sell that listing yourself. Oh, the neighbor sold that, you just sold the house, and so on and so on and so on. And oddly enough, behaviorally, sellers tend to be the best referral source too, long-term. And John gets a ton of his business now from centers of influence and past clients, which is where the majority of it comes from. And you have to earn your way to the point where you have a business that's consistent with, referral sources like John's is. You can't just walk into the industry like that. But yeah, so listeners, if, John, if there are 3 things or 2 things or 1 thing that you'd want them to take away from our time together today, what would those be? What would be the things that you'd want these people to, our listeners and viewers to really internalize that would be of the most service to them?
Be in motion would be one of my first ones. There are days, last year, or like 2 years ago, I did 87 deals, which was a very, very busy year for one person. Last year, I only did 56, which is still one a week. And, I think a lot of people would think that's really busy. But there were days where I didn't feel like I was busy at all. But I still get up, I get dressed, I plan some type of real estate potential activity that I could be doing, even if it's going to somebody else's open house, or it's just, be in motion. Always be talking to people, always have it on your mind, that, you need to find 3 more people to help between now and the end of the month. How am I going to find those 3 people to help? So for me, it's always be in motion. I probably am a primarily lazy person, and if I actually come to a resting point, the inertia to get me going again would be really challenging. So I just don't allow myself to stop. Slow down for sure, but not necessarily stop. And I think just, take the mindset and start saying the words all the time that you are genuinely trying to help people and you're serving them. And that starts to take hold of actually how you think. It may not be how you think initially, because you still have to make a living for your family, and it has to be about getting a paycheck. But in my world, I've put that on the back burner as much as I can. I personally never calculate what my commission will be on a sale until it's a firm deal, until it's you guys call it in contract or
pending contract. Yeah, it depends.
Right. So once we have an agreement that's in place that's binding, then I say, oh, wow, okay, I'm going to make 25 grand. Whoopie-doo, that's cool. But until that point, I never do that, because I get too engaged in the outcome of me getting a paycheck. And that's not where I want to negotiate from. I want to negotiate from the helping my seller or helping my buyer. So I think those would be the 2 most important things, kind of be in motion and just talk, even if you don't think it yet, talk the language that you want to be that person. And in my world, serving people, helping people, I talk it, but it's legit. And I think the more I talk it, the more legit it is.
Of course. And so listen, there's a lot of listeners, a lot of, Canada's their 2nd biggest market for our coaching organization, 2nd biggest market for our EXP group. You're a key member of our EXP group, somebody that we've known, loved, and trust for a long period of time, especially as a coaching client, as a friend. We refer to you all the time on the podcast. So there's going to be a lot of folks, not just in Canada, that are going to want to connect with you, possibly about you sponsoring them at EXP. If they wanted to send you a text, can you offer your cell phone number so you can start that conversation with them?
Yep, 100%. One of the things about not being a secret agent is actually having your cell phone on your advertising. If you want people to get a hold of you, let them know how. So my cell phone number is 519-942-7413. And, it's on 24/7, but I, probably respond to it 18 hours a day or so. Happy to help that.
Say that one more time. I mean, we're going to put it on the screen on the video, but probably most folks are going to listen to us on the podcast. So say it one more time.
So 519-942-7413.
There you go. John, I really appreciate our time together. And I really appreciate you being part of Julie and I's lives. We're having a lot of fun, and where we're all going together professionally and with, being part of EXP is truly extraordinary. And it's such a pleasure and an honor to be of service to you, my friend.
Well, honestly, I feel the same. And you guys, I don't feel that I would be where I am today if it wasn't for your guys' intervention. There have been a few SOS calls that I've had to make over the several years that we've, kind of worked together. And you guys have been amazing. If there was a third thing that I would recommend, it would be get help, get a coach, get your ego out of the way. Somebody who's third party that knows the game can help you, whether that be Tim and Julie, or whether that be someone in your brokerage that you can, use as a reference. But by far, in my opinion, the coaching agency that you guys run is second to none.
I appreciate
that.
I'm not going to try to top that. So we're going to end right there.
Awesome.
So John, have a fantastic day. And listeners, this is one of, dozens of these exclusive interviews that we're making available to all of you. And remember, these interviews are going to be available first to those of you who are subscribing to our new newsletter, which is harrisrealestatedaily.com, harrisrealestatedaily.com. So if you're not yet subscribed to our newsletter, go ahead and do that right away, harrisrealestatedaily.com. It costs you nothing. And then you're going to start getting a daily newsletter with great interviews, our podcasts, and a lot of other exclusive content just for newsletter subscribers. In the meantime, John, thank you for your time today. Have a fantastic day. And listeners, you can listen to any of our thousands of past podcasts on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and of course, YouTube. Have a fantastic day. Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.